Rhea with Career Discovery. In this segment, we're going to be discussing the various types of interviews. And I'll start with Kary, and you can tell me about your process, and then Danielle, you can chime in.
All right. Well, the first thing to think about is interviews have steps, and it starts from the biggest information and drilling down to the smallest information. So generally, when you're working with any kind of a recruiter or an HR person, they're going to start out with really basic knockout questions, usually done in a phone interview. You know, how many years of experience do you have? Do you have the technical hard skills we're looking for? Is your salary range anywhere in the ballpark? And are you someone that could start right away? I mean, those are usually the first 4 or 5 things. I mean, you're just trying to put them in a yes pile or a no pile. Keep in mind, the person that does this interview is usually not very skilled. They may not be very, appear to be very caring about you, and they also may not have read your resume. They could be literally just sitting there typing away and putting these answers in, and they're going to pass this on to another person. So that's sort of like your screening interview, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Then you move into the next interview, which is usually a face-to-face. You'll get an invitation. So out of that screening interview, your goal as a candidate is to try to get an appointment. That's probably the best you can do. Hopefully they've said, we want to have you come in, and you can write that down. Or you make the invitation, do you see any reason why we shouldn't move forward? And now we go to the next interview. And one other point on that screening interview, if the company calls you and you're not prepared, set a time when you are. Because if they cut you and your dog's barking in the background or the kid's yelling and screaming, you're out. It's just not going to matter. So be professional and set a time so that you're prepared. So now we go to the face-to-face interview. Before you even walk into the door, you want to find somebody who's interviewed at this company before. And if you can't find that, then think about who it is that you're going to be meeting. You should never walk into a first interview not knowing who the hiring manager is or who this audience is.
Yeah, and who you'll be interviewing with, how many people, what the process is.
Exactly.
The other thing that I found, too, is it's important to always bring extra copies of your resume.
Mm-hmm.
I've had candidates come in before who didn't bring copies of their resume to the interview.
Or they assume that we've sent it ahead of time, and we may have. But the employer is then remiss in putting it out there. So I think the other thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you've researched who you're going to talk to. LinkedIn is a great place for that. If you can't find it on LinkedIn, call the company's customer service department and ask a little bit about the person. I mean, you'd be surprised what you can find out. But you should have a good understanding of the title of the person and how this position that you're applying for relates to their position.
And I think if you don't get that information, you can also ask in the beginning of the interview so that you understand that before you start the interview process.
Right. It's not uncommon these days to have a whole team of people interviewing you at some point along the way. Companies are very, very democratic about these things, and you have to treat each one of these people you meet as a first interview. Just because you're coming back for the 3rd time doesn't mean that you're the shoo-in candidate. So the next stage, I would say, after that first interview is to go to the second interview. The second interview could be at a number of different things. It could be a technical skills interview where they're going to now grab somebody that they feel is important enough that you're a good enough candidate that you warrant their time. So now you need to think about what is that person's agenda and how does your position you're applying for fit into their scheme of things. And I think you probably could add into this because you're doing a lot of technical recruiting right now.
Yeah, I think you need to look at the different companies, and each company has a different interview strategy. And so I think it's important to understand up front, and you can either talk to the recruiter and get a feel for that. But I think it's important to understand how that process works, and that will help you do a better job in being successful in that process.
There are different kinds of interviews, aren't there? I mean, in terms of if you were working for, interviewing for a company like a more technical company, tell us about that type of interview.
I can tell you, one of the companies that I work with, we actually, depending on the level of the position, require technical testing of the candidates as part of the interview process as well. And it's a timed test where they are working on a financial model, and then also taking the findings from that financial model and coming up with with conclusions and providing a presentation based on their conclusions.
And you mentioned that companies like Amazon have a more intricate process as well. What do you know about that?
So different companies, I think, have a different strategy where when you're interviewing with a variety of different people in the organization, they'll have different objectives within that, whether they're looking from a technical perspective or from a personality perspective or just within a general fit within the organization.
All right.
And I would add the other thing is before you move to the next level, you need feedback. You need to get it from the person that is your recruiter, HR manager, whoever your contact in that company is. You need to know what they think and what the pros are and what the cons are. Because if you are assuming that what you're saying is what they want to hear, and that's not the case, you could get torpedoed out on the next round. Then keep in mind you're going to have employment testing, applications. There's a lot of work that you're not paid for in the interviewing process, and you need to do it with a smile on your face. And if you're a 20-year veteran in an industry and you're being asked to do an Excel test, it's pretty easy to get a little upset about that. But once again, they're looking to see how well do you follow direction, can you do basic things. And I think you'd agree you run into that a lot these days.
So interviewing is a very complex set of skills and certainly requires what I think we want to discuss next session, which is researching the company. This is Jan Reha with Career Discovery. Thank you for this segment.